In this unit, we are going to discuss the most appropriate motivational interviewing style to be applied in a counseling session. So this is going to be based on the client's stage of change. You're also going to have the opportunity to demonstrate what you've learned through role plays. So at the end of this unit, you should be able to have a good understanding of the stages of change model. Understand which intervention strategies and plans are most likely to work with clients at different stages of change, and learn how to apply motivational interviewing approaches to the stage of change model. And then you can demonstrate knowledge and skills in some of the role plays that I will provide you opportunities to do. So you might recall the stages of change model that we discussed in the first lesson. So the premise of this model is that one stands at a different stage of preparedness to change a behavior depending on their perception and their understanding of the pros and the cons of that behavior. So although there are some debates related to the interplay between stages of change and motivational interviewing, one thing is clear. Health, addiction researchers and counselors, they've both found that both of these approaches are helpful when assisting clients to modify their drug use behavior. Counselors have also found these useful in extending the range of interventions to assist clients to move from that pre-contemplation stage to the maintenance phase. And motivational interviewing approaches also enable counselors to support their clients, to motivate themselves to change. It's an empowering revolution in treatment modalities. In a face-to-face setting, I would have you divide into groups, but since this is modified for virtual learning, I want you to spend about 30 minutes thinking about and developing some intervention strategies for each of the three categories of clients. And that's going to be the pre-contemplators, the contemplators, and the clients in the maintenance phase. So there's a link to a short video you can watch in the lesson about treatment options for the various stages and a video on harm reduction. Please watch these videos to get a better understanding. Then I want you to spend about 10 to 15 minutes answering the last three questions on this slide on your own sheet of paper. How do you determine a client's stage of change? What is the difference for clients in each stage? And what are the differences in intervention approaches? So again, spend the next 30 minutes kind of developing some intervention strategies that you could use if one of your clients were in one of these stages. Watch the videos in the lesson, and then I want you to spend 10 to 15 minutes answering these questions. Now we're going to talk about the strategies and the interventions that are most likely to be effective for the different stages of change. Pre-contemplators, these are the people that are considered happy users. So they generally don't link their substance use to any problems, and they're generally unconcerned by their drug use or its related consequences. And the client's not yet considering a change, or they're unwilling to change. And as with motivational intervention strategies, it's going to be critical for you, the counselor, to develop rapport and trust with the client. And this necessitates an empathetic approach and adopting an active listening style. It's important to kind of raise doubts or concerns about the substance use patterns. And this can be done in a variety of ways. So it's going to be helpful to explore the events that brought the person to treatment or examine the results and the outcomes of previous treatment. Ask them if they're able to identify any problems that are associated with their substance use and their perceptions of those problems. And to help focus on these issues, you might want to provide some factual information about the risks of substance use and some personalized feedback about your client's assessment findings. Motivational interviewing strategies involve exploration of both the pros and the cons of substance use, and also the pros and the cons of changing that behavior, and the development of any discrepancies between the client's current behaviors and future ambitions or their goals. So If your client is resistant to change, it's going to be important to raise those issues around risk reduction so we can reduce the adverse consequences of substance use until that client is choosing to change their behavior. I discuss risk reduction in another course on the website. Then in the contemplation phase, the client acknowledges concerns and they're considering the possibility of change, but they're ambivalent or on the fence or uncertain about that change. So it's important to normalize these feelings of ambivalence and help the client to tip the decision balance scale towards change. This can be done by, a variety of strategies, like eliciting and weighing the pros and cons of substance use and of change. Because we don't want to just look at the pros and cons of using. We want to look at the pros and cons of changing that behavior as well. And also moving the push to change from external forces to internal forces. Yeah, my husband or my wife or my parents or whatever, my boss, whomever is telling me this, and I have to do this because of that. We want to push them to understand that they're changing for internal forces, not those external forces. Clients often come for assistance because of concerns expressed by other people, and they have very little internal motivation to change. And you can determine this by assisting the client's personal, or assessing the client's personal values, their ambitions, their goals, and asking them to identify how their substance use is interfering with them living out those values, ambitions, and goals. And it's going to be important to emphasize that the client is free to choose whatever they want to do, and the responsibility lies within. One of the things that I say to my clients is, I'm not here to change you. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm the helping you to put a puzzle together, right? I'm not going to ask you to change in any way, shape, or form. I can't change anyone else. But I do have some knowledge and skills to help you figure out what it is that you want to do. So in order to enhance that client self-efficacy, you may want to reinforce any efforts that your client has already made to change their behavior in the past and any optimism that they have for the future. You want to try to elicit self-motivating statements and a commitment from your client to change. By summarizing, eliciting self-motivating statements, and assessing self-efficacy and expectations of treatment outcomes amongst your clients, you can really help them to move into that next stage of change. Then in the preparation phase, the client intends to take action and is making small steps towards change. They're also considering what will help to enable the change. So the client is committed to and is planning to make a change in the near future, but is still considering the how. And at this stage, you as a counselor should really clarify the client's goals and strategies for change. Offering a menu of options for treatment is going to empower the client in the decision-making process. And counselors should also be prepared to provide guidance on how best to proceed. In doing this, counselors should consider ways to lower individual barriers to change and to help the client to enlist support for that change. The counselor can explore things that have worked in the past to help the client change their behaviors, or identify some things that they are aware of and that have helped other people. There may be some structural barriers to change, like financial barriers, childcare, work, transportation, maybe some other potential barriers, and you may need to work with the client to overcome these barriers as well. And if your client is able to verbalize an intention to change, they're going to be much more likely to make a change. Then in the action stage, the client is actively taking steps to change, but they haven't reached a stable state. And this stage usually takes a few weeks. There are motivational strategies that a counselor can implement to help maintain gains. It's important to engage the client in the treatment process. and reinforce the importance of staying off drugs. It's also critical to support the client's understanding that change takes place through small steps. Help the clients to maintain a realistic view by acknowledging that encountering difficulties in the early stage of change is expected and it's normal. Then you can conduct an analysis of risks and develop appropriate strategies to overcome these potential pitfalls. It's also going to help to assess the quality of family and other social support structures. Supportive families and peers can help to assist and maintain behavior change. However, you need to apply caution in situations where the family does not have a stable relationship with the client. And I talk more about this topic in another course that I offer on my website. In the maintenance phase, the client has changed their drug or drinking use behavior for a relatively longer period of time. They're working on relapse prevention strategies and consolidating gains. In this phase, counselors should help the client to identify sources of pleasure that are not reliant on drug use. And it's also important to support lifestyle changes and affirm the client's resolve to maintain their abstinence. Clients, they also need to practice and use new coping strategies to avoid returning to their drug use. So it's critical to identify those high-risk situations and techniques to prevent relapse. And you should also develop a rescue or a safety plan if the client resumes substance use. As the client remains in treatment for a longer period of time, it's going to be important to review the long-term goals and develop new ways of maintaining a drug-free lifestyle as needed. And not all recovering drug users are able to stay drug-free for the rest of their lives. Some who return to substance use during treatment will end up relapsing back into their heavy use, while others may lapse back into substance use and then recognize the problems and dangers and then turn right back around and recover. In the relapse stage, the client must now cope with the consequences of returning to drug use. They also need to decide what to do in the future. So in my course on relapse prevention, I discuss this in greater detail, the differences between slips, lapses, and relapses. So appropriate motivational strategies for the counselor in this stage is going to include helping the client to re-enter the change cycle and commending them for any willingness to reconsider their positive changes. You also need to explore the reason for your client's recurrent drug use as a learning opportunity. So by assisting your clients to find alternative coping strategies while maintaining supportive contact with them, you help them to re-establish a drug-free life. So just keep in mind that the process of change is a continuum. You need an accurate assessment of the client's stage of change, and that's going to assist the counselor to target specific interventions for that client. Strategies for interventions are linked to the stages of change, and not everyone goes through every stage. In the pre-contemplation stage, the client is not considering giving up. During the contemplation stage, the client begins to think about something or doing something about what they're doing. In the action stage, the client's attempting to quit or reducing their intake. And then during the maintenance stage, the client has succeeded in giving up and they want to remain that way. They've internalized the change. And most users resume use after making attempts to give up. And this lapse stage is actually part of the change process. So I just want to thank you for joining me today and completing all the lessons. If you have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat section of this lesson. In order to receive your completion certificate, you must complete the course survey and pass the quiz with a 70 or higher.